Welcome to the chaos sector. WSU Kim has requested us to interview her personally. Unfortunately, ma'am, we don't do personal interactions. But there is an alternative. Since you have been interviewed several times by several content creators, how about you, yes, the individual posting comments assumed to be WSU Kim, upload a video on your channel? I think that will satisfy a lot of people, and it allows you to voice your opinion without feeling pressured to answer questions from individuals in those chats, or even on a stream panel. Doesn't that sound logical? And since you're asking the chaos sector to interview you, well, you can address everything we've inquired about. Now I will say that we do not condone the name calling and have advised individuals to not do that. Despite any or everything, we want to give people respect, regardless if we disagree, or even question. For those who are doing that, please be mindful. Our audience has always been known for being civilized, critical thinkers, and genuine. Some have been around for almost 10 years, and others have just come about. Regardless, we ask that everyone show respect. Ask the necessary questions, and draw conclusions from those answers. As for the person of interest, maybe you should make a personal video regarding these issues. It would definitely get a weight off of your shoulders. It's different speaking personally to the true crime community from a personal video rather than appearing on streams. In the personal video, you are in control. WSU Kim, I think that's the best thing to do. If you wish to continue engaging with the true crime community regarding this case, it would be wise to voice your opinion freely and not to be seen as someone's hot topic in their streams. Does the chaos sector have malice towards you with that type of perspective? Of course not. We may be a bit brute sometimes, but it's not from a place of malice. While the team is dealing with that issue, I want to go back to Bethany Funk in particular. Don't you all find it strange that Bethany's accounts had not been publicly released, but Dylan's was? The only thing released was her claim of seeing Ethan and Xana at the frat party. Both of Dylan and Bethany's phones were inspected, and based on what the authorities found, it suggested that the murders occurred around 4:25 a.m. But if WSU Kim's daughter claimed one of the housemates relayed information to someone, wouldn't that housemate's phone records show several calls that actually provide leads to killers? Let's tie both sides together. WSU Kim has valid points, we can acknowledge that. The PCA is full of fabrications, assumptions, and inaccuracies, and based on WSU Kim's claims, the housemates were aware of the attacks and also murders, which the PCA obviously won't claim. I will give her that, we agree. Now let's revisit how information had been passed on. The source came from one of the housemates. The housemate calls a fellow sorority sister, specifically a Pi Phi sister. Now we know Bethany is a Pi Phi, and Dylan was not a sorority sister. We checked, and the results keep showing Bethany was a part of Pi Phi, no mention of Dylan being a part of a sorority. I believe she applied, but there was no indication she was accepted. In fact, that's a bit suspicious in itself. I recall someone inquiring about how Dylan and how she was a freshman, staying with seniors. Was this based on financial assistance, as one of the housemates moved out prior? But then, wouldn't there be other students qualified and would like to stay there? A freshman somehow moves in, with juniors, seniors. Like mentioned, the reason Dylan appeared a bit detached from the rest of those housemates is because she was not longtime friends, she had just become friends a year prior. I believe she was allowed to move in because for one, money was thrown in, but also, it's possible that she brought a drug element into the fold. Bringing quote, new money, access to drugs, such as marijuana, is a great proposition to the housemates. And this could explain how the housemates got involved in drug trafficking. Could we suggest that if Dylan wasn't there, we wouldn't assume the murders were drug-related? Maybe Emma and Demetrius wouldn't be relevant in this case? And the biggest question, would those murders even happen if it weren't drug-related? Oh my, that's a heavy theory, but it's very possible. And, the fact that Dylan was the only one with an official affidavit indicates they knew what role Dylan had surrounding drug trafficking, which they protected. Based on WSU Kim's claims, Bethany was also awake. Yet in police reports, there is no indication Bethany was awake, because there are no accounts of what Bethany witnessed or heard. So Dylan was used, because Bethany would obviously provide evidence of multiple people there, as opposed to the quote, lone killer, in Dylan's accounts. They got the truth from Bethany, but they didn't release her accounts based on the actual, accounts. And if they protected that, this means they had also protected the motives behind the murders. But someone, in my opinion, was not really into it all, and she has the exculpatory evidence. So to establish context, it would be Bethany who called other sisters. But once again, her phone records would show this, something Moscow PD apparently didn't feel the need to report on. How could this crucial information and evidence not be a part of the police report? She has the exculpatory evidence, my friends, and this is being protected aggressively. We go back to the subpoena. A bit of confusion of which one came first, but it doesn't matter. Bethany had agreed to meet with the defense, then her attorney quashed the summoning to testify. Or she was summoned to testify, it was quashed, but Bethany agreed to meet with the defense. There have been two different reports, where one came before the other. Doesn't really matter, because Bethany herself, yes, the Bethany who experienced the horror that night, had agreed to meet with the defense. So that's the main focus. There is a reason the defense is focused on Bethany, instead of Dylan, right? Because Dylan's accounts based on her affidavit are not factual. And Bethany's accounts, based on WSU Kim's claims, proves Kohberger was not there, because there were other perpetrators at that home. And this was during the attacks. If Bethany had those accounts in her affidavit, many would ask the obvious question, how could Kohberger be the killer, with multiple people there at the same time? One is true, while the other is likely to be a lie. Is it possible that the phone call from Bethany that night was relayed to the defense? Who would have told them? Not sure, but obviously the defense knows Bethany has exculpatory evidence. Mind you, this is not a word salad, or an attempt to fool the prosecution. It has to be some form of evidence that either eliminates Kohberger from even being there, or proves Kohberger was not the killer. Maybe he was there, it's possible. But Bethany could prove, regardless of which scenario, that Kohberger was not the killer. This is the main objective, exonerating Kohberger from the charges against him. Now the problem here, there is no identity of who that sorority sister was. At least to our knowledge. Bethany calls one of her Pi Phi sisters, this sister, calls another sister, and that sister's boyfriend, called WSU Kim's daughter. The time frame is allegedly 10 a.m., based on WSU Kim's accounts. Why else would she be notified about those murders, unless she was linked in some manner? Mind you, it is not the football player, it is the girlfriend of that football player, who is linked to WSU Kim's daughter. Apparently they were friends, and the girlfriend was a Pi Phi, just like Bethany. Also, we have to factor in the sorority. Madison, Xana, and Bethany were Pi Phis. Two of those Pi Phis were murdered, so with only Bethany left, it's obvious she would call her sisters about it. But the information reached someone who wasn't a Pi Phi, such as the football player. And this is where WSU Kim and her daughter come into the equation. We've all questioned why the housemates didn't call 911. But we also have to acknowledge the secrecy of sororities and fraternities. They won't call 911 about internal issues, it's a part of their, quote, vow of silence. Very unfortunate. The information reached WSU Kim's daughter, and she told her mother about it. Now, this is where the information becomes fuzzy. There were multiple people at the home that night, apparently Bethany and Dylan were downstairs, hiding. Let's say this is the scenario. For them to know who those individuals were, they would have identified them by voice or face. But this is the key point, because once again, it would be Bethany who relayed this information, not Dylan. Dylan was not a Pi Phi, so she had no obligation to inform Pi Phi sisters about the murders. We have to keep this in mind. Bethany identifies those individuals, in which they are physically there when the murders took place. We understand why WSU Kim would tiptoe around in her interviews, that's not really the problem. But, when she identifies Kohberger as the mastermind behind those murders, now you have to establish evidence, yes, evidence, that this was the case. Because those multiple individuals at the home during the murders, to anyone with half a brain, would come to the conclusion that they are the murderers. And to suggest Kohberger was the mastermind, let alone being there that night, has to be proven. This is all we wanted WSU Kim to establish. You can't go based on his arrest and work backwards, that's not fair. After he had been arrested, there were all types of claims that so-called justified he was the murderer. There was a claim he had stalked one of the housemates, with no proof. There was a claim he had interacted with one of the housemates, as reports claimed there was so-called digital evidence of this, with no proof. There was even a claim that Kohberger had broken into one of his friend's home prior to the murders, and yet he wasn't arrested, no criminal record, but somehow he was identified as the perpetrator of that crime? The point here, if you're claiming Kohberger was the mastermind, and he was there that night, and even stalked those girls, without proving this, you are adding fuel to that fire of misinformation the mainstream media plastered out here. You're supposed to be an inside source to the truth, not a component of deception, right? Yes, this is the problem. Even after Kohberger's arrest, can you prove that Kohberger was the mastermind? Can you prove that he had been there weeks prior? Can you prove that Kohberger had dirt on those housemates? We simply want this to be proven, otherwise, you should not publicly implicate Kohberger was the murderer, despite him being arrested for the murders. You don't provide any proof prior to his arrest that proves, or indicates, he was the murderer. You understand? Now my colleague suggests that she was a part of framing Kohberger, which is logical. I can't ignore the suspicions surrounding her statements that would indicate that this was true.
Here's the problem, and we hope there will be clarification. WSU Kim claims that Kohberger had dirt on those housemates. What type of dirt would he have? When you say this, it leads to inquiring about what type of dirt those housemates had, and how Kohberger would be aware of it, despite being from Pullman. Claiming that he was at the home weeks prior, and was, quote, kicked to the curb, means he was interacting with someone, right? In a response, WSU Kim stated she never claimed Kohberger was the creeper. But in the actual interview examined in the previous episode, you literally stated that Kohberger was the creeper, who was kicked to the curb, which you relayed to Moscow PD. You claimed that the girls told you this.
Wow. I do think that Brian was a mastermind. I do not believe he was alone, because the information first given to my daughter was that there were 3 people there.
And this was at what time were 3 people there? At 8 in the morning or at 9?
When apparently when the murders happened. But
around 4 in the morning.
Maybe Dylan thought they were just going to be shaking them up for the money.
So the 3 people standing outside was at 4 in the morning, and one was a creepy guy. I think I remember hearing that one was creepy.
Yeah, they just call him the creeper. There's a lot of creepers that hang out there. I don't know. I think there's more questions to be asked. Mm-hmm. So my detector test is to be taken. I know they don't hold up in court, but they certainly work well to get, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the only one who passed one is that Brian, because he's such a sociopath.
And when Brian was arrested, the first thing Brian said was, "Oh, was anyone else arrested?"
Well, what I do think is the reason he wanted to be extradited so quickly is because he's got something. He knows every single thing that these kids have done. When they felt like they were being watched, stalked, they were being watched. They were being watched diligently. I believe he's been in that house before. I think my understanding is he had been in the house, but he was a creeper and they kicked him to the curb and wasn't allowed to come back. That is what I think happened like a few weeks prior. And I've told the police that. And that is because I've gotten that from the girls, because if they're not partying there and they're just getting this narrative from, but it's still really, the towns are pretty small together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty connected. So it's like being on the same campus, it's just 5 miles apart, right?
Mm-hmm. So your daughter mentioned that a few weeks prior, someone was kicked out. That was a creeper. Like, is that something you heard from your daughter?
She just thinks, she doesn't, she was told it was the creeper. And
we hold you accountable for what you say, not what you may think. Now WSU Kim is slick, because she conjoins Kohberger and the creeper together, yet said as if those were 2 different people. She says, he had been in that house before, and it was a creeper, and he was kicked to the curb. Adding, quote, and it was a creeper, implies that Kohberger was there, but a creeper arrived, and Kohberger was kicked to the curb.
I believe he's been in that house before. I think my understanding is he had been in the house, but he was a creeper and they kicked him to the curb and wasn't allowed to come back. That is what I think happened like a few weeks prior. And I've told the police that.
But in reality, she doesn't want to claim Kohberger was the creeper outright, because it magnifies that she had notified Moscow PD about this creeper, who would be Kohberger. And of course,
this would be before he was arrested.
And of course once more,
this would mean she identified a specific person as the suspect, and gave this information to Moscow PD.
Boy, I tell you, it's hard for her to get out of that jam. The girls, we assume, are not the girls from the house, weeks prior, because we assume you had no knowledge of those housemates specifically, until the murders. But, this doesn't seem to add up to me. In retrospect here, let's break it down. The girls informed WSU Kim that there was a creeper who was kicked to the curb weeks prior, so this person is considered a potential killer. Mind you, all this information is coming from the housemates, relayed to those girls. Unless some of them, or all of them, were at a party weeks prior. The creeper has to be known by someone, because they came to the party, by way of some type of association to another student. They would know there was a party, even if they crashed it, you understand? How would Kohberger know there was a party? Did he literally stalk them so much, that he followed their social media post, about an upcoming party at that home? Possible. But this is where it starts to break down. Kohberger was a teacher assistant at WSU, right? Not saying he was widely recognized, but let's be honest, a teacher assistant would be recognized in their town. Even if he's not liked, or popular, students would recognize him. So if this teacher assistant goes to a party, someone would recognize who he was. And since the girls from WSU knew there was a creeper there, wouldn't they more than likely talk about how a teacher assistant was trying to mingle with students at parties?
You know, but it's still really, the towns are pretty small together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty connected. So it's like being on the same campus, it's just 5 miles apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
The point here, Kohberger would be identified the night he was allegedly kicked to the curb, and of course, this would be the same creeper, who was there that night. And as a result, a teacher assistant had been involved in the murders of 4 college students. Did we dig too deep for you guys? Or is this understood? Think about it. Kohberger was a teacher assistant at WSU. He also attended WSU, as a student. He would be known, as many have gave their experiences with him from college. Even students gave their experiences from interacting with him as a teacher assistant. So if this teacher assistant was snooping around, we assume trying to hook up with, or hang out with, students at parties, wouldn't this be spicy gossip for college students from both WSU and UI?
You know, but it's still really, the towns are pretty small together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty connected. So it's like being on the same campus, it's just 5 miles apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
In addition, WSU Kim claims her children, or one of her children, was in a classroom right next to where Kohberger taught.
So, from what I've been able to boil down and get pieces together from what I know, like from, and I think Wazoo's involved too, don't get me wrong here, I'm not just saying U of I. I mean, both schools are involved. And not just because he was a teacher there. How did he get vetted? Who is vetting him to be a teacher in classroom 12 and my kid's sitting in classroom 13? Who's doing that?
So her child was in classroom 13, and Kohberger was teaching in classroom 12, right next door. Surely, if there was anything suspicious about Kohberger, students would talk about it among each other. If he was a creep, they would gossip about it. If he was a drug addict, they would gossip about it. If he was simply a quote, loser, they would gossip about it. Anything that puts Kohberger in a negative light, it becomes magnified, and since this is a college environment, he will be silently ridiculed. The point though, is Kohberger would not only be recognized in town as a teacher assistant, but even more by those negative characteristics. You understand? Quote, isn't that the teacher from WSU? Who invited him to the party? Unquote. And his presence would send a wave of text messages throughout. This is not far-fetched, this is exactly how these type of scenarios play out. Let's say Kohberger was deemed a creeper, by college students. Typical, college students are very superficial, and often a teacher is the butt of jokes. But what if we applied the element of drug trafficking into this equation? Now instead of being the butt of the joke, Kohberger is deemed a snitch, or better yet, a threat. Something to ponder. His white Hyundai Elantra sticks out like a sore thumb, they would identify him easily. Yet, it would appear, they didn't want to identify him as the creeper, even weeks prior, right? If he is involved in immoral, or behavior that conflicts with how a teacher should behave, wouldn't the students expose him for this behavior? No reports that he was reprimanded for unethical behavior while being a teacher assistant. Despite the claims he was, quote, rude, no reports of him being suspended, or fired for that. He was terminated due to another issue with faculty, not, I repeat, not due to any issues regarding students. Even with this, students would know he was terminated, which he still is in the spotlight at WSU. And since WSU Kim's child was in a classroom next door, pretty sure word got out that this teacher assistant had been terminated. It's common gossip, parents know a lot about faculty at schools. So, it appears WSU Kim was aware of Kohberger before he was known by the general public. She's very talkative, and in being mouthy like that, she explained how she is actively involved in her children's school life and activities. She knows all about sorority and fraternity life, so we have to also assume she was informed about a teacher assistant being terminated, right next door to her child's classroom. You understand? We're just giving different perspectives of the scenario presented by WSU Kim regarding the night of the murders. And for WSU Kim to claim Kohberger had dirt on those housemates seems a bit off. I don't think he had dirt on them specifically, rather, he had info about the drug trafficking in general, which naturally includes college students. There are too many elements that conflict with each other that night, based on her claims. She claims there was a shakedown, and that the housemates were getting rid of drugs. If there was a shakedown, then they were being robbed for their drugs and money, right? Is Kohberger a part of this? How about this scenario, to momentarily justify that theory? Kohberger and others had come to the home, to rob the girls of drugs and money. They robbed the housemates, everyone leaves, the housemates then try to get rid of the remaining drugs. Of course, they can't call the police. But, they were not out of the fire. Keep in mind, everyone is still alive, all 6 housemates were awake and being robbed. Perhaps at gunpoint. Soon after though, the actual drug pushers arrived, and murdered the housemates, due to loss of profits, and the potential that they would snitch to the police. This is the only way that Kohberger could have been there that night, and murders took place, but one was separate from the other, but also connected. Meaning, Kohberger did what he did, and got away with drugs and money, yet other individuals murdered those housemates. I don't believe that's what happened, but there is always a possibility. We asked WSU Kim how could Kohberger, who she deemed to be the killer, was at the home at the same time as the other individuals, who are alleged to be there to rob the housemates of drugs and money. Both can't be true here. If there were multiple people at the home, and WSU Kim claims the housemates were aware of everything, including the attacks, and the murders,
why was there only one person charged with those murders?
Bethany is the one who called her Pi Phi sister, about everything, right? She knew who the killers were, and she gave this information to her sisters. And this is why Bethany didn't provide any of this information to the authorities, it's because of her vow of silence in Pi Phi. But she did tell her fellow sisters about it, and that information spread to WSU Kim's daughter, who is not a Pi Phi, and eventually landed in WSU Kim's lap. Summarizing this, WSU Kim also knows who's responsible for the murders. And it's not Kohberger. But she would rather throw him under the bus, perhaps because she was threatened, not to snitch on the real murderers? Okay, we understand that element. But if you were threatened to not reveal the truth about who was responsible, then it would have been wise to not even speak out at all. You would only cause more confusion, as you attempt to allude to the truth, while pointing the finger at a specific person. And on top of that, your claims are being generated from Kohberger already being identified as the killer. So what are you really proving? WSU Kim claims she spoke to Moscow PD about the creeper, who was at the home weeks prior, and we also assume she claimed that was the same creeper that night. But if you notify Moscow PD about this creeper, there will be a request for an identification of the creeper you know. Did you tell them you didn't know who it was? But wait a minute, in your interview, you claimed that Kohberger had been stalking those girls, and that he was the creeper, depicted by the girls, and he had been kicked out weeks prior. So we can only assume here, based on what you stated, that you gave Moscow PD a specific person, who was Kohberger. Mind you, this would have to be before Kohberger was arrested, because it's counterproductive to inform Moscow PD about Kohberger, when you knew he was arrested and charged with the murders, based on the DNA found on a knife sheath. There's no need to give Moscow PD this information, as they already have him at the home based on the DNA, and his vehicle spotted in surveillance. WSU Kim would know this, she kept her eyes glued to the news reports. So she would know a suspect has been arrested and charged for those murders. She informed Moscow PD about Kohberger, before he was arrested. And that, my friends, opens up a can of maggots. It aligns with the theory that she was a part of framing Kohberger, to protect not only the real culprits, but also to protect the drug trafficking. How could you give Moscow PD a specific person in Kohberger, if you didn't know of him? If anyone recalls, one of our episodes pointed out how it was odd that a student at WSU was informed about the murders. Does anyone remember that episode? Here's a snippet of it.
Made me have so many other questions, like, holy shit, she's right. And not even to mention that, how the hell did her daughter know? Her daughter goes to WSU. Like, we have, like, way closer, like, I can go through, like, on my phone, one person or two people and be in that house. Right, in that sorority. Like, I've got girls on my phone that are in the sorority, I've got people that know other people in that sorority, like, upper and lower classmen. How did that girl find out? And it just,
like, depending on who people are friends with and stuff like that.
Right, but even then, that quickly, like, you're gonna go to your inner circles first, right? Like, that's why I was talking to the one kid, because his girlfriend was freaking out, and so he was having to be there for her without, like, being able to go to the sorority, so he's texting her and letting her blow off all this steam and telling me what she's telling him, too, amidst the other information that we were receiving. And, yeah, it just, I don't know. I don't know.
The female who attended Washington State, being notified about the murders is a bit suspicious to me. The male claims that the inner circle should have been notified first, as they are closer not only physically to the home, but perhaps closer in association to the victims.
We suspected something suspicious then, but we did give WSU Kim the benefit of the doubt, as her perspective aligned with what we knew, regarding the housemate's knowledge of what happened that night. But when someone is not being honest, having something to hide, unconsciously they will expose themselves, without even realizing it. See, the brain processes information. But when someone is lying about something, and they obviously know the truth, the brain has to figure out a way to make the lie a truth, and the truth a lie. This causes a breakdown, known as stuttering. The truth is easily accessed, while lies have to be generated, masking the truth, which leads to stuttering, contradictions, inconsistencies, deflections, even ramblings on and on.
Exactly. If you won't, or can't, reveal who murdered those housemates, then all you would do is allude to who could be involved. Although that's accepted, it is the claim about Kohberger that conflates everything. And as a result of this conflation, your claims and opinions appear to be deceptive. We know you know the truth, but there are many who know the truth, and we know nothing about them, because they are silent. The students in Queen Road apartments know the truth, the neighbors next door know the truth, everyone in that neighborhood knows the truth. When you publicly speak out about those murders, claiming to have key information, specifically about that night, and during the time frame of the murders, of course people are going to ask you key questions. If you are caught fabricating or embellishing, many would slate you as an opportunist, which is very disgraceful in connection to this case. But if you are fabricating or embellishing to protect the truth that you know, we would advise you respectfully, just leave it all behind. Don't have any more interviews, let the truth be the final voice. Because the more you have these interviews, the more everything you claimed prior compromises what you say going forward. This is why a personal video, expressing yourself to the true crime community, is the best avenue to take. The interviews do not help you, trust me. WSU Kim, take this opportunity to redeem yourself. If you are genuine, then your personal video will reveal that. My colleagues think you're on the wrong side in this investigation, and it's kind of difficult to deny that theory. Do everyone a great service by unplugging from everything and letting your voice be heard. If not, your voice will forever be stained with suspicion. This is the Chaos Sector.